Do you like sports? Do you like art? What about science? Giraffes? Giraffe scientists that paint rugby games? It's all available on Audible, the biggest audiobook site with the largest selection of audiobooks this side of the inner solar system. No need to use your boring old eyes anymore. The ears are the future, my friend. Why, you're using them right now. So check out Audible and get your listen on. Go to www.readlearnlivepodcast.com/audible to start your 30-day free trial today.
I think part of the problem it comes from the fact that we worship celebrities to begin with. If we just didn't worship them at all, if they were just normal people who were just good at things that we enjoyed, that would be different, I think. But because we worship them, we hold them to a standard of purity, like impossible purity.
Hello and welcome to Read, Learn, Live, the podcast about improving yourself through literature. I'm your acclaimed host, John Monaster. I'd like to welcome you to episode 69, also known as the atomic number of thulium, a rare earth element. As always, if you have ideas for books you'd like to see featured, or have authors you want to put me in touch with, you can reach me at jon@readlearnlivepodcast.com. Today, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with author Seyward Goodhand about her book, Even That Wildest Hope. Seyward Goodhand's work has been shortlisted for the Writers' Trust, McClelland and Stewart Journey Prize, and a National Magazine Award. Her first collection of stories, Even That Wildest Hope, is now out with Invisible Publishing. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Read, Learn, Live podcast. I'm your host, John Monaster. I'm here today with Seyward Goodhand, author of Even That Wildest Hope. Seyward, say hello.
Hi. Hi,
Thanks for
everyone.
joining me. Yeah, good to have you here. I'm really
Yeah,
excited to
thank
talk
you.
to you. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you about this book because, like I said beforehand, and I'll stand by it, it's pretty crazy,
Yeah.
in a good way. And there's a lot happening. And
Uh-huh.
it's a series of short stories, some very
Yep.
short, some a little longer, and
Mhm.
it's quite a book. And it was, I don't know, I can honestly say I probably never read anything like it, and that's a
Okay.
compliment. So it's positive.
Oh,
So,
thanks.
yeah, maybe just to start us off, to ground us a little bit before we dive too deep, what is Even That Wildest Hope? If you were describing this to people, what would you say?
Okay. Well, I'll go. I'll say a few words about the book as a whole, and then this will allow me to answer this question: what is even that wildest hope? So, as you know, the stories are all very different from each other stylistically. The characters are quite different from each other. The worlds are quite different from each other. Very idiosyncratic worlds. So it's hard. It's a hard book to talk about as a whole, as a unified whole. And partially that's because I wanted it to feel that way. I wanted it to feel like
Hmm.
this surge of plenitude and diversity coming at you. And I wanted each of the stories to only be whatever it was that they felt that they needed it to be. I didn't want them to conform to an expectation of a story, I guess. And so they're all quite different from each other, but they are all responding to a common set of anxieties. And one of them would be an anxiety about the end of the world, about global warming, the sort of
Mm.
anxiety that all of us are feeling right now. And it's an anxiety that rests on, not just like a fear that we've gone too far, that we basically have been doing okay, but then we've just gone too far, but that something about our basic premises are just wrong. And so one of the basic premises that allows us to instrumentalize nature and to use it is just that we are very different from nature, that there's an absolute distinction between animate and inanimate material, and a hierarchy between consciousness and things that aren't conscious. And so one of the things I'm playing with here is like, what if that's wrong? What if that assumption is wrong? And what if inanimate things have some kind of character? So a lot of the stories have feature sort of inanimate things as characters that they may not speak and feel and act, but there's like a quality of the inhuman in all of the stories. So even that wildest hope, it's actually a line from a Ruth Stone poem called "Being Human."
Hmm.
I love Ruth Stone, and it's the full line is even that wildest hope that we may meet beyond the grave. And originally, actually, the collection was going to be called Afterlives, like afterlives of genres. And was thinking a very close friend of mine had died of cancer when I first started writing this book, and I was thinking about afterlives. But even that wildest hope that I changed it to is about just even that wildest hope that things matter, that things have value, ordinary people, but also just that things have value, even if they're not seen by the world or are successful or whatever, even if like
Yeah.
a little piece of dandelion fluff has value. That's the
Right.
wildest hope.
Yeah. Okay. I can get behind that. And I
Yeah.
think I think it's something that increasingly everyone is starting to get behind as this whole movement of, animal rights activists and, plant rights and making sure that we are thinking about the future is getting a huge push finally. So I think that a lot of people in a big way are starting to think of things that maybe are not at our level of consciousness as still being important and relevant and worth protecting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and partially I've been working on, so I'm just finishing, I just said earlier to you, I'm just finishing a long years of study. I've just submitted my PhD dissertation. It's on sympathy.
Mm,
It's on like why we feel compelled, why are we drawn toward others even if we don't want to be, or why do we feel drawn toward things? And something that came out of all of this study is just that like people, the remarkable fact that like we're conscious beings who have these feelings of inner depths and subjectivities, but actually we're made of like inanimate, but we're also very material, right? And so like you know, how does that determine us and direct us in ways that we aren't even aware of, just that other part of our nature? So,
mm.
um,
Yeah. Well, then
yeah,
we could get into like
yeah,
the nature of consciousness, right? What is
totally,
this?
yeah,
This is
yeah,
the hard problem of consciousness, right? That philosophers are struggling with. It's like what gives
yeah.
rise to it. So
What gives rise? Yeah.
yeah. Okay. We'll bring David Chalmers in and have
Oh
a whole
yeah.
nother
Yeah,
discussion
exactly.
another
Yeah.
time.
If there's an opportunity for a wormhole, I will go down it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. But quickly before we delve into the book, I like to
Okay.
get into a little bit of like the creative process.
Okay.
So, so you mentioned a little bit about this, but was there any particular spark, or maybe talk a little bit about why you decided to write this collection or to use that theme to pull together some of these stories you've written into this whole?
Right. So yeah, these stories I wrote them over a period of a number of years, alongside this thesis I was writing. So I guess and I always, I guess, thought of my other kind of work. I mean, maybe writers do this. They come up with some sort of large obstruction to writing in your life, like being busy in some other way, so that you don't ever have time to write it. And then like this other thing is the enemy that's always keeping you from writing. But then it also kind of creates this friction that you want in some way. So yeah, the dissertation was this other thing that was like preventing, taking up all my time. But actually, I think it was quite inspiring at the same time.
Hmm.
So I wrote a lot of these stories alongside it. And then the ones that I decided to put in the collection were the ones that I felt most sincere as I was writing. So, I have lots of stories, and everyone, every writer who writes a short story collection has lots of other stories that aren't in the collection. And the ones that aren't in the collection tended to be ones, I don't know. I don't even know how to say this. Where I was like trying to be cool
Mm,
when I was writing them, or like cared too much about what people would think, or So I just like there's something about them that's not sincere.
mm. I think a large part of our efforts at life are very deep down an effort to be cool.
Yeah, totally.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's very hard to get away from that.
Oh,
We're
it's so hard to get
social
away from.
creatures. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So okay, that's really interesting then. So you were sort of writing these as you were writing your dissertation. So would you kind of go back and forth, like when you
Yeah.
hit a roadblock on one, you kind of just turn to the other and use that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Oh,
Yeah.
that makes sense. That's kind of my secret for dealing with procrastination. It's like have a lot of
Yeah.
projects and then just keep switching. So you're still getting
Exactly.
work done, but you
Yeah.
get time
Exactly.
away from the thing you don't want to do.
Yeah.
It's a good
Totally. Yeah.
secret. Okay.
It is a good thing.
Was there anything that was particularly difficult about these stories?
Yeah. I think the thing I eventually became conscious of was that I wanted to be sincere as I was writing, and
Hmm.
I have nothing to lose by being weird or by writing these stories that are as weird as I want them to be, I guess, or that are just themselves. And probably more to lose. I don't know. So I think the thing that was difficult is just um, letting them be what they want to be. It's very,
Mm,
very hard to not try and write something that you that you think will work, that just to make it something that other people will like, and to
Yeah.
have that be the main over determination for the whole thing.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think my struggle was just that internal one. It's like,
Yeah.
letting them do their own thing.
Yeah. And did you kind of plan to that extent? Did you plan things out in the sense that you mapped out a story narrative arc and then you wrote to that? Or did you just maybe create characters and then start writing them and see what happened to them? Or did you just really just sit down and write it all out without having any sort of pre-planned anything?
Kind of a bit of both. So
Hmm.
some of the stories I wrote in days, in hours, and some of the stories I wrote in years. Um,
Wow.
uh, yeah, and some were months. So that's like maybe like a good, appropriate happy medium that took me a few months. I don't
Yeah.
know. Some stories I thought would just be really short, and they ended up being really long, and you know. So I don't even feel in control of this, how easily something comes, or how all the pieces fall into place. Sometimes it can come really quickly and all the pieces fall into place, and you do have a sense of the structure of it before you start, and it's got this innate propulsion, and it's
Hmm.
easier to write. And then sometimes it's just you have to spend so long figuring out what it even is and what the characters want and what you're doing and rewriting it a billion times. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish they were. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's no easy answers
Yeah.
here. This is
No.
this is why it takes time to be a writer. It doesn't just
Yeah.
happen. That's fair. Okay,
No.
so let's hop into the book here. And so this first story in Kidu
Mhm.
is maybe the longest, and it is
Yeah.
certainly it's so interesting to me that you put this first because it
Hmm.
felt the most disorienting to me
Hmm.
to some degree. Um, so it's kind of a crazy story. I don't know how much we need to get into the details, but one thing I noticed was the concept of fame and kind of grabbing the idea of fame,
Hmm.
pulling our protagonist
Hmm.
away from their home and from where
Hmm.
their original happy place.
Hmm.
So how did that promise of celebrity of being remembered affect Enkidu, and why was that a kind of a worthwhile goal for Enkidu, and why maybe is that such a goal for so many people in our world? Why is it that we're attached to that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And that definitely is one of the themes of that story. So that story is like a retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh,
Hmm.
um, which I was teaching at the time, and it's very much about this concern with Gilgamesh sort of wanting to be famous forever. And it was actually the Epic of Gilgamesh was written as this like advice to princes, um, by a philosopher, poet, scribe kind of person. And I don't. This isn't what the my story is about, but eventually in the original epic, he just has to learn to confront his mortality. And to be less of a tyrant that way after he confronts his mortality. But Gilgamesh is like this mythological king, and he's got two sides to his nature. So on the one hand, he's this terrible tyrant who abuses his people, and then on the other hand, he represents like human technological genius. So he invents writing, he invents bricks. He's like the civilizing force in humanity. And then he meets this wild man, and or the gods create this wild man and Kidu who are going to save the people from his tyranny, and they become friends. And all he needs is a friend and an equal. So that was sort of part of the original story. And then I was playing with it from the wild man's perspective, and what yeah, why how as soon as you enter a social environment or an environment of civilization, there's a fear of
Hmm.
not existing unless other people see you, or not existing unless you somehow have fit into that hierarchy of value and meaning that I was talking about earlier. And so yeah, the feeling it's about that, like that anxiety leads people to do terrible things, sometimes also to achieve feats of excellence. But um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, it's an interesting thought. I think even Gilgamesh at some point in the story even has a quote like that, like fame is being thought of by other people or being in other people's heads or something.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of interesting because in some ways it kind of was framed to me in that sentence as being a way of, living after death, or a way of
Yeah.
being remembered by people even
Yeah.
as after you weren't around. Which again is
Yeah.
like you said, sometimes it can be kind of a noble goal. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily always bad, but
Yeah.
it certainly drives people to do bad things.
yeah, it drives people to do all like good, excellent things and bad things, or I think it comes from an anxiety about, yeah, about death and wanting to control it, wanting to
Hmm.
control that inevitable fact and say, no, I'm gonna be the one who's gonna rise and transcend it somehow, this inevitable fact, and I'll survive past death, or make myself exist for other people, it kind of control how I am in the world, or
Yeah.
how people see me in the world. And,
Yeah.
there are limits, obviously. Hmm.
So yeah, and connected to you're talking about Gilgamesh. So there's this Shamhat the Holy, and Shamhat explains that people would never rise up against Gilgamesh. Even
Hmm.
though he is a horrible, horrible person. Like this is taken to the
Yeah.
extreme in this story, where he's raping
Yeah.
children and just being
Yeah.
the most awful thing you could think. And on
Yeah.
the other hand, he's providing for them, like you said, he's creating
Yeah.
writing and bricks and giving them a town
Yeah.
and a place to be. And so, people are sort of okay. And so this is, of course, like a very extreme example. But I
Yeah.
feel like generally in our world, these types of situations happen where
Yeah.
there are very bad sides to someone and very good sides to someone. And we put up with the bad
Yeah.
because of the good or something.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to think like, how can we think about making those compromises? Or
Yeah.
is it even fair that we should have to make those
Yeah.
compromises? Should we seek people that's not a need?
Yeah, that's a really hard it's a really hard question. So the things he does, they are extreme, but they're not more extreme than things that happen all the time. I mean, if you give Michael Jackson, those things, allegations just coming out, or that, if you heard of Jimmy
Yeah.
Savile, that Jimmy
Mm-mm.
Savile scandal in the UK. So he died, and this came out in like the 2000s, like 2012 or something. But he was this
Mm-hmm.
big BBC radio and television personality, and it turns out he'd been like molesting, like abusing children for like decades, and like hundreds of people had complained about him.
Hmm.
And no one had done. He basically had the keys to the city, and he was a philanthropist, and he was kind of using his philanthropy, like he would go into hospitals and abuse children there, and like people knew about it.
Wow.
So this huge scandal. So it's like this happens, I don't know. Why do we do it? I mean, why do people just turn a blind eye if someone has a bit of power? It's not even that any, Michael Jackson or Jimmy Savile are like tyrannical kings. It's not like they're just like
Yeah.
people with power, who seem amazing in some way, or they're talented at something, and that lets them get away with so much. And yeah, why do people want to overlook that? Or why? Maybe there's a fear of being. I think there's a fear of being compromised at all. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to just like, you can never, so you can never enjoy Michael Jackson's music, or like him at all if he even has these predilections that he has. Whereas I don't know, if there was a situation where he could like admit to having the predilections that he had, but not act on them, and then be compromised, and then, then maybe if all of this was more open, maybe this would be a solution. But um,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's very tricky. I mean, I think about that distinction a lot when you think of like at a much less law breaking level. When you think about
Yeah.
an artist who
Hmm.
creates beautiful art, but perhaps has political opinions that are the opposite of
Yeah.
yours, or
Yeah.
something like that, and maybe uses the money they make from their art to fund
Yeah.
things that you disagree
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
and then I don't know, yeah. So it's sort of like, well, wait, there's the beautiful art over here,
Mm.
and but something what's happening over there. And I actually
Hmm.
just read something yesterday maybe, about J.K. Rowling posting about she's kind of jumped into this debate about trans people, and there was some issue with someone that got fired because she said some transphobic things, and J.K. Rowling supported
Mm.
her, and it was just I know it was this whole firestorm
Yeah.
where it's like people
Yeah.
are upset, and I guess J.K. Rowling is already, I don't know, people were less
Yeah.
than happy with the way everything played out with Harry Potter.
Yeah.
So it's just one
Yeah.
of those things where you know at this
Hmm.
point millions of people are Harry Potter fans, and so
Yeah.
how much is she is she allowed to get away with more because of that, and is
Yeah.
that fair?
Yeah, yeah, it's a really hard question. And I think part of the problem, it comes from the fact that we worship celebrities to
Yes,
begin with. Like, if we just
totally.
didn't worship them at all, if they were just normal people who were just good at things that we enjoyed, that would be different, I think. But because we worship them, we hold them to a standard of purity, like impossible
Yeah.
purity. Is if we didn't worship them, if they were just people, if they weren't, if everyone had the same amount of money, if they weren't even richer, if they were just people who were
Yeah.
really, if they were just really good at something but not worshipped,
Right.
um, that would feel different, probably, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. No easy answers there. All right. Well, we
No,
could get stuck on that forever.
we could,
Um,
yeah.
so there's this other story, the fur trader's daughter. And actually, when you were talking at the beginning about the idea of inanimate objects, some of the stuff in this story became a lot clearer
Yeah,
to me. The
yeah,
fur
yeah,
trader's daughter is generally an inanimate object that
yeah,
has some lifelike magical elements to her.
yeah.
And so there's this, the fur trader himself, and then he has this wife, Ilse, and they're just very horrible to the daughter. And is over and over again, you just see examples of the daughter being treated badly. That the daughter makes friends
Hmm.
with these bears, and then the
Hmm.
bears get killed, and then the daughter has to skin them, and it's just like
Hmm.
very cruel, just like textbook
Yeah,
fairy tale cruelty, I think,
yeah,
level here.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
at the same time, I mean, it's interesting because the way you set it up, there's also moments of kind of tenderness or
Hmm.
caring, or she gets a sister at one point, and the sister is kind of nice to her.
Hmm.
And so throughout all that, this kind of inanimate object doesn't respond sort of vociferously when there is cruelty towards her. And it's interesting to me because you talked about how it's important to treat inanimate objects,
Hmm.
as if they are more. But at the same
Hmm.
time, you chose not to necessarily give this walking, talking, inanimate object kind of more firepower, more emotional ability
Yeah.
to fight back and think through it and all
Hmm.
that. And so I'm just curious to know, why that happened and how can we think about
Yeah.
responding to cruelty like that? Should it be
Hmm.
more in the way that this daughter responded, or was the daughter not going far enough?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think so one thing I was really committed to in this story was that she is made of wax. Like she's literally wax. She's not like so she's not like a human with a bit of waxiness. Like she's made of wax. And so
Yeah.
obviously like she is humanized and has feelings and talks and behaves in some human ways. But I wanted to so I mean considering she's made of wax, I guess she does have some kind of um voluntariness, and she like kind of wants she's coming to consciousness and she wants secrets to keep.
Yeah.
Um and I wasn't consciously, I think, thinking of like AI, but what's odd about, so the father makes this wax daughter who's like his servant tool, and we have lots of inanimate tools that we use obviously in life, and
Mhm.
like how are we supposed to treat those things, and like is it what's so tense about that story is not just that he's cruel to her, but that he's like sometimes nice to her.
Mhm.
And it's like, why is he, if she's just inhuman, why is he sometimes nice to her? Does he want her to be more? And like, I don't know, what kind of relationship would you have with like an AI servant? Um,
Well, this is how
like
I
what?
know that there are people that to like tell their Alexa to like shut up and stuff like that, right?
Yeah,
Where it's
yeah,
like we're already kind of tending towards,
yeah,
this like assuming that this inanimate object definitely
mm,
has no rights or feelings, and therefore
yeah,
we can treat it however we want, which
yeah,
is of course establishing a dangerous precedent when, if you can
yeah,
imagine that there are different levels of consciousness and
yeah, yeah.
eventually the AI will get to a higher one.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a big moral problem. And like, is that what you do if you have total freedom to treat someone in whatever way you want to? Is that the impulse, just to like
Well, hopefully
tyrannically?
not for
Hopefully
everyone,
not. Yeah, hopefully not. Yeah.
right? I mean, this gets into
Yeah.
like what are people's personalities, and
Yeah, exactly.
this
Yeah.
unmasks maybe a little bit about people when, when given the
Yeah.
option to
Yeah.
treat something like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And it says more about the person doing the, whoever says more about the person telling Alexa to shut up than it does about Alexa, I guess. Um
yes.
yeah. Um it's a big and then I wanted her parents to be kind of nice to her too, not just only, I wanted them to have some kind of a little bit of a reformation halfway through the story.
Yeah,
Uh,
which there was, and then
yeah.
then it seemed like the daughter was just like, too bad. Like I am calculating my evil plans. And but it's like
Yeah.
I wondered even if like if like I was able to ask the daughter, like, were you
Hmm.
planning to be evil? Was this premeditated evil
Hmm.
when you plan? I don't know if she would say yes necessarily.
No,
You
no.
know,
Yeah. More opportunistic, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Opportunistic evil. Yeah. Yeah,
which is
I had a draft of that story. So that story is one of the older ones, and it had a
hmm
totally different life a number of years ago. It was a finalist for an award here in Canada a number of years ago. And then for this book I ended up rewriting it. So in the original version, she's way more even more kind of distant,
hmm
less psychotic, but more distant, I guess.
sure.
Um, and it just sort of and the story is shorter and it ends with her kind of like maybe walking off into her freedom,
hmm
but it's not clear how she what that she does have sort of any autonomy in that in the first version. And so in this version I wanted to give her some autonomy. She's in this situation where she's totally determined, she has no free will really.
hmm
um but then how does she find some autonomy? And it's by being a kind of impish little, in this case an impish little psycho. I guess she's a bit of a, yeah.
What a way to describe someone. Impish
Yeah.
little psycho. Just do not run into that person on Tinder.
No, no, PCO, no, no, PCO
Um,
wax girl, don't date.
yeah. Okay. So I just want to jump and talk more about these longer ones. Maybe there's just more meat for me to talk through. But
Yeah.
one of the big ones was pastoral,
Mm-hmm.
and I really enjoyed pastoral. Actually, I don't know, maybe it was my favorite. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the shepherd character was super interesting because of all these transformations that are occurring throughout, and the I think the reader kind of starts to latch onto one aspect of her personality and feel a certain way about the character, and then you pull that rug out and it's like, no wait, now I feel this way because of these new behaviors, and then all of a sudden this happens, and there's
Mm-hmm.
this kind of back and forth as the shepherd transitions to all of these kind of different phases of its existence. And it
Mm-hmm.
almost made me think about, like, is that are those people's personalities, like, is it our personalities changing? Is that maybe a
Mm-hmm.
way in which,
Mm-hmm.
but one thing in particular I liked, it was there was a part that talked about the shepherd and why he was good at his job. And kind of this was early on when, things were still good. He wrote that he was good because he didn't do it to lead, rather his sheep go where they want and he follows. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of him almost being a sheep himself to
Mm-hmm.
some degree. So,
Mm-hmm.
why does that make him so good? And I was just trying to learn, like, think about it, like, are there lessons to learn there about knowing when to lead versus knowing when to follow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you like that story. I think that might be my favorite story too. Yeah, I think in that moment he's using his like higher capacities as a human just to just to protect the sheep, not to control them. So
hmm
all of their little movements and impulses and desires are not inhibited. He's not micromanaging, I guess is the one way of saying it. He's not micromanaging them. He's like
Yeah.
he's basically giving them a wide parameter, um and then let them do whatever they want within that. So yeah, I think there's some kind of a lesson there. I think just like how much control you exert over others, like not more than you need to,
hmm
yeah, that's why he's good at that for a while. Yeah.
Do you feel like you're good at that?
I don't know. I don't think so. No, I think I'm
Yeah.
like very sensitive to other people's moods, and I'm constantly like, you know,
It's very
why do
difficult. It's very difficult to truly, be the shepherd in that sense, to just,
yeah.
you have to, I think you have to, that first part that you mentioned where you have to be very good at setting the stage. So if you're going to give people freedom, you have to give it to them. The parameters you set have to be correct. And
That's true. Yeah.
that's the hard part, I think, is if you
Yeah.
set, as long as you set the right parameters, and then people can go do whatever they want and feel
Yeah.
more agency, and you can feel
Mm.
comfortable and know that they're going to be fine. But
Yeah.
whether it's too close or too large, that can be, at least for me,
Yeah.
when I think
Yeah.
about micromanaging people. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not easy.
No, it's not easy because you have to, on the one hand, you have to like stand back and have faith in people, but they might just want to like run past the electric fence into the, I don't know, or like blow everyone up or do, you never know what they're going to want to do, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, like when do you impress yourself harder on them if they want something different from what you want? Yeah. Uh,
Right,
I don't.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, just something to think about at least. Be
Hmm.
what's my favorite yoga word? Intentional. To be intentional
Yeah. It's,
about.
yeah. I'd like to be more intentional. Yeah.
Yeah, that's everyone's goal.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the things that happens in that story too is there's a dairymaid who was a child bride and is very very wealthy and has this necklace with these diamonds on it, and she's just crazy rich. And
Hmm.
but you wouldn't really know it. She's just kind of living her life, hanging out, no
Hmm.
big deal. And it kind of comes out in the middle of the story when everyone's all the characters are basically together in one room that everyone's kind of furious at her in one way or another, and people are treating her horribly. And
Hmm.
it seems like all this is happening because they're jealous. And it's
Hmm.
not necessarily that they're jealous of the necklace or the money, but they're jealous that she's not doing anything with it. They're upset that it's
Hmm.
just kind of sitting there and it seems
Hmm.
like a waste to them.
Yeah.
So it was so interesting to me to think about that and just wonder, I don't know, maybe if you could talk a little bit about just consumption generally and maybe the lack thereof and what's so triggering about that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question and gets at something. That moment kind of came out really intuitively. So I wrote this story a lot of iterations. This is one of the ones that took me a long time to write, and a lot of it was like difficult. A lot understanding their motivations was very, very difficult in this story because, and the problem with her is, well, she has this ability to leave this place where she's been abused, and um, why doesn't she just do it? Because she's been given this money in exchange for being a child bride, and so part of the problem was like what's making her stay when she could leave. And so that was like one of I wanted her to want to stay even though she could leave. And then other people were responding to that. And so that was like an insight that just came out of that sort of that problem of her motivation. But yeah, I think there's, if she has what other people want, but is like squandering it, I guess, in some way, or
Hmm.
that's the view. And so yeah, there's this like fear of, and there are people, it's like written in this pastorally mode, and they're these feudalist pastorally people. They're cultivating the land all the time. There's like no waste, right? Nothing is wasted. Yeah, there's sort of, and she's the successive person, the successive character,
Yeah.
in most ways, right? In all ways, she's an excessive character. She has a lot of desires. She wants more than her a lot than her allotted share, but then also isn't, I guess, I don't know, isn't taking like an expected channel of progressing or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I thought of her almost like someone that grew up in a rich family or got an inheritance or something, but still wanted to, go through
Hmm.
life and work and go
Hmm.
through things the old-fashioned way and not just like sit around or buy their way into a board
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for her, because she was like given this wealth in exchange for she was born a dairymaid, so working class, but then was given this wealth in exchange for these years of being a child bride. And so, were she, I guess, to accept her wealth, she would have to admit to some, I don't know, fully assimilate having been that bride, I guess.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, and so she's rejecting it, I guess, holding it all at bay.
Yeah, as a way of like kind of protecting herself from fully acknowledging the kind of horrible reality of,
Yeah,
being a bride in
yeah,
your teens or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And like the worst part
yeah,
is she's trying to do that and then everyone else is upset with her for it. Not
yeah,
quite
exactly,
not
yeah,
quite coming to terms with
yeah,
that or understanding it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They're kind of like, you make us feel uncomfortable. Just get out. Why are you here? Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
and I also thought about people that are very rich and don't spend the money and how we look at those people today. A lot of
Mhm.
times we'll be upset if rich people spend their money in what we see as the wrong way.
Mhm.
And but we'll also be upset if rich people just hold on to their money and don't spend it at all.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
we basically want rich people to take their money and donate it to the causes we want.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like we
definitely.
want that channel to happen out of
Yeah,
all those options. And so
yeah,
it's kind of I felt like that a little bit too. It's kind of the same
yeah,
thing where there's some expectation around like once you become wealthy, you will be giving back to those in
yeah, yeah,
need.
yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's true. And in the story's case, like her wealth is all contained within this necklace that she has. So it's even
Yeah.
like stuck in this one condensed object.
Hmm.
That's totally not, yeah, it's not being redistributed at all. It's not going back into the ecosystem, back into the economy or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like a that's what a dragon does, I guess. It just sits there for
Yeah.
no reason else, you
Hoards all
know?
the money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It doesn't send it back into the economy. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting to think about. I was going to try and make some like central bank, reverse central bank. I don't know.
Right, yeah,
It's
yeah.
fine.
It's true. Yeah.
Pulling all. It was like what's my years of economics training.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, anyway, so there's a couple other stories I wanted to quickly chat about, and one of them is the Gaymans of Winnipeg,
Hmm.
and there's this relationship between Chappie and Lean, these two characters, and you know it's a very odd relationship. They are on very different pages as far as you know mothers and daughters go. Um, you know, I would almost say that it's reversed from the earlier fur trader's daughter. You know, Lean is
Mm-hmm.
the cruel one, kind of to some extent, and Chappie's just kind of trying to hang out.
Yeah.
And but you wrote this line that I appreciated at one point, which was mothers know something about daughters that daughters themselves don't know.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I guess I didn't quite understand the context, or I didn't quite pick up on that.
Mm.
I don't know if there was anything in particular that you felt like maybe from personal experience,
Mm.
or is this just a generally accepted wisdom that you know we know moms get us in a way that we could
Hmm.
never because they were there since you know day one.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. So I think when I think about it's so, I have a young child. He's a not my daughter, he's my son. He's two. And then I have a good but also fraught relationship with my mother, like most people do with their parents.
Hmm.
And so, now I'm in this position of being like a child, and I still feel very much like a child around my own parents. So I'm a child and a parent at the same time. And as a child, you're always like assuming your parents don't get you, I think. Or knowing that they only see the outside of you and they don't really see, I don't know, there's a feeling they don't really see the real you, they only see the outside of you.
Hmm.
But then and that might be true, but I don't know, being a parent, it's you do kind of just get your kid's basic temperament, I think. um and I think yeah, you forgive them a lot too, even which is something I'm finding really interesting about being a parent is,
Hmm.
I don't know, yeah, your capacity for judgment sort of just like, I don't know, goes away goes away, like for making good moral judgments. You'd like let your kid get away with a lot, I think.
Mm.
Um, like you wouldn't encourage them to, but you would love, it'd be yeah, the loyalty there is like makes you in some ways amoral in relation to that one person.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking, I guess, about that. Or Lean thinks that, and
Right.
she feels invisible, but she's not invisible, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
the whole point.
Hmm.
Um, all right. Well, so the parachute is this story that I think it's correct me if I'm wrong. It's the only one that involves a real person or a
Yeah.
real historical figure,
Yeah.
and so it involves Lenny Riefenstahl. And so I'm just curious, maybe just quickly give your understanding of who Lenny was and why you felt drawn to her and how you
Hmm.
became interested in her.
Yeah. So this story is actually inspired by a Donald Barthelme story called Cortez and Montezuma, in which these two also historical figures have a relationship. But obviously, as historical figures, they're enemies of one another, and would one of them would seek the total annihilation and destruction of the other one, even if not directly and consciously, just because of world views and historical movements, right?
Hmm.
And so I wanted to write a story like this, but I wanted all the characters to be women. And it just so happened that so Lenny Riefenstahl is one of these two characters, and then Simone Weil is this she's the other character. So it's just like, what if Lenny Riefenstahl and Simone Weil, who are these two titans of the 20th century, they never knew each other, but they were alive at the same time, could not have been more different. What if they were just like in the same confined space together and had to have a relationship? What would happen? And so that's what.
I actually didn't know that Simone was real either.
Oh,
So,
okay. Yeah, she's real too. She's like this French philosopher and mystic.
huh.
Um, Yeah. So, and she's, just a really, really influential figure. She influenced people like Hannah Arendt, and she's like a really, really, really influential figure. And then Leni
Okay.
Riefenstahl also is this influential figure. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to find two powerful historical figures who were women who were very unlike one another. And then, but the Leni Riefenstahl character, learning about her, yeah, it was harrowing in a lot of ways. Leni Riefenstahl, because she. So and the story is about like Leni Riefenstahl wants to be apolitical, even though she's obviously not apolitical, but she wants to be apolitical and to totally separate her art from politics. And she's sort of this opportunist, right? She there's an opportunity for her to make art and for her films to be funded because she agrees to make the kind of art that is in the service of the Reich. Um, yeah, and so reading about her, on the one, she's a problematic figure if you're for any feminist, I think, because she's on the one hand one of the best female filmmakers um, of all time, and also a Nazi, and so even though she denies that she's a Nazi, but she is, she's just opportunistically in there, and so I wanted to, and she, I think the way that she got around this herself was just to be um, super romantic. Not she didn't work in realism.
Hmm.
Neither do I. So I mean, there was a lot of things that were harrowing for me. Like she's kind of over the top, bombastic, super dimensional, romantic, not realist. She wants to redeem reality with her, kind of romantic vision. Um, and I also don't write realism. I also, like her, come from a working class background, and she was really resentful about that, and that definitely played into what she was doing. Um, yeah, so I had to learning about her for the sake of this story was really, really interesting and good, and
Hmm.
and harrowing in some ways, because like, yeah, she's a cautionary example of not of the person you don't want to be if you're with her.
Yeah. Well, I don't, I wouldn't consider you bombastic from what I know
No,
of you so
okay,
far. So I think you
okay,
haven't, checked all of the adjectives
yeah,
off
okay, yeah,
that she did. So far
yeah,
you're okay.
yeah, okay, yeah, yeah,
I mean, it
but
was, it was a really interesting story. Even not knowing that Simone was, a
yeah,
well-known character, just
yeah,
the, the arc and what was happening and the dialogue, I think was quite striking in terms of, Lenny talking about what she felt and all that. So,
hmm hmm
yeah.
yeah, and yeah, just like, can you? A lot of artists try to do that, right? To play that card of I'm just not political.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, that's what we were talking about earlier. Is that
hmm
you can say you are, but
hmm
it's difficult, especially if you're famous and everyone's paying attention to you, and everything you
Yeah,
do is going to get. We're at a stage where buying certain brands of clothing are political choices. So it's like,
totally. Yeah, yeah,
it's difficult.
yeah,
Okay. Okay. Well, so we kind of hopped around and covered a lot of different
yeah.
stuff, and there's lots more in the book. There are plenty of other stories we didn't even get a chance to talk about, and yeah, hopefully everyone listening got a sense of there's tons in there. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight? Any other story we didn't talk about that you specifically wanted to mention, or anything else you wanted to get out about this collection?
Um, yeah, I don't know about that one. The anything else? I think yeah,
Okay,
maybe,
that's okay.
maybe, yeah, yeah. Um, maybe your last question about like one other thing, the one other thing, the magic wand thing.
Well,
Oh
we'll
no,
get
that's
there. We'll get
we'll get
there.
there. Okay, yeah,
Don't
yeah.
don't jump ahead.
Okay,
We get an order. These are numbered for a reason.
number. Okay.
Um, okay, so the next question is, what is next? So we talked. You've got your dissertation
hmm
submitted, hooray, and you have your defense in just a few months.
hmm
So what are you thinking about now after all this work, both for the book and your dissertation, and everything is going to
hmm
be behind you at some point? Have you
hmm
started to think about where you want to take all of this?
Yeah, I'm writing a novel and another collection of short stories. So I figure I'm going to torture myself by having two projects again. I think that's what I need. I need
Right,
the
right.
I need the lashing. Yeah, on
The
either side.
anti procrastination
I do. I need
measures
the
as we were
procrastination. Yeah.
discussing. Okay,
Yeah.
well that's
Mhm.
exciting. Well, you'll
Yeah.
have to let me know when those are ready. I'd love to read them
Oh,
because
thanks.
I'm sure they're also going to be really interesting based on what I know so far.
Ah,
Cool. All right. Well, let's do a quick thunder round. We'll get to your
okay.
favorite question and then we'll call it
Okay.
a day.
Okay.
So, okay, first off, what is your favorite food and or drink?
Okay. Cheese.
Cheese?
Yeah.
Okay. Where is your favorite place you've ever been?
My favorite place is this little place north of Toronto, outside of a place called Huntsville. It's in an area called the Muskokas. I don't know if you've heard of the Muskokas. It's on this
Nope.
little lake. It's a little so the lake is called Oxbow Lake, and it's a lake that's adjacent to Oxbow Lake called Little Oxbow.
Hmm.
And there's nothing around it. So it's like this little reflection. It's like the moon to the lake. Oxbow's already small, but then this other little lake is even smaller,
Right.
and there's just nothing around it. Yeah,
Ah,
it's very,
so
that's
you
my
like
favorite.
you like the solitude?
I think I like that. I don't know. I've gone there a few times, like since I was young. I think I like the solitude. I think I like that it feels like a person to me. I think I
Hmm.
grew up like talking to this lake randomly. Yeah, I'm
It's
surprised.
fine. No big deal.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm sure Lenny Riefenstahl never talked to a lake. Don't
No, I'm sure
worry.
she didn't. I bet she didn't. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, talking to the lake. I named some of my furniture.
Okay. All right. Last question. If you could wave a magic wand and change any one thing, what would it be and why?
Right. This might take us back to the beginning. So if I could wave a magic wand, I would make all of us, like myself included, just care less about celebrity,
Hmm.
and about, mattering in that way.
Yeah. What do you
hmm
think would happen if that were the case?
I think people would just be a bit more mortally aware, like a bit
Hmm.
more existential and mortally aware, a bit more humble, a bit more able to sympathize with each other instead of competing with one another, and to feel like they're all in it together, you know? Just a little readjustment of what's valuable.
Yeah, just adjusting the sliders.
Yeah, yeah,
Makes sense. Okay. I'm behind it. I
yeah,
I would vote for your platform.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, listen, Sayward, this has been great.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
holding the
you.
book up because it has a very cool cover as well, so it's almost worth it for that.
Yeah.
But even That Wildest Hope is a great collection of short stories, and they're very mind-bending and fascinating and interesting, and I would give them a go. So, Sayward Goodhand, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, John.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Read, Learn, Live. If you liked it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. If you hated it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. And so it goes.